The moment that bell goes off on Wall Street, the business world jumps into action. Stocks get bought and sold, futures are traded, and millions of dollars change hands in a matter of seconds. But guess what? Those traders on the floor, these days, they deal only in a very small percent of buying and selling. Actually, most transactions are executed now via computers. And if you're part of the finance world, you probably already know that the bell is mostly ceremonial. Because in finance, the business day, well, it never really ends. No one was more aware of that than Jason Dennen. At one point, Jason was operations manager at a financial services firm. And from the outside, it's one of those jobs that people expect to be all about liquid lunches and teeing up at the golf course while making a lot of money. But the hard truth was, for Jason, it was more like being chained to a hamster wheel where it was a never-ending spin of overtimes and entries on a ledger gnawing away at him like 1,000 paper cuts. And like many of us who have been on a similar spinning wheel, Jason desperately looked for an escape. And like many before him, his first solution was eating and more eating. But then he started to gain weight. His health suffered. During a regular checkup, he found out not only was he 30 pounds overweight, he was pre-diabetic and had pre-hypertension. Before work took up all his time, Jason had an active lifestyle. He even participated several times in that pinnacle of endurance races, the triathlon. And so, now he decided to try something else. You're never going to guess what. Wait for it. Skydiving. Yes, my faithful listeners, skydiving. In several ways, skydiving fit in with Jason's can-do spirit. And so, as he did for everything he set his mind to, Jason trained and trained with the pros until he earned his license to jump off on his own. And it was exhilarating. Each jump was like a leap into freedom, like floating into forever. Until the unthinkable happened. For Jason, it was just another beautiful sunny day. He had signed on to take several jumps, and the first two were as glorious as they had always been. But on the third, as he savored that familiar joy of defying gravity, a burst of wind smashed against him, throwing him off course. Suddenly, he was hurtling down much faster than he should, and course correcting was only going to make things worse. He saw the ground fast approaching, and by the looks of it, he was headed straight for a cattle fence on the side of an airplane hangar at 30 miles per hour. He braced himself for impact. So, what happened? Well, let's hear it from the man himself, shall we? So hold on. You're in for some turbulence. Jason Dennen, today on the Gratitudeology podcast.
Will you walk through the fire? Would you ride through the storm? Will you walk on a wire? Will you save me if I fall? Will you break through the madness? Set us down where we're safe. I'll be right here waiting till you find me again.
Jason Dennen, welcome to the Gratitudeology podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just take a quick little glance into who was little Jason.
Yeah, so I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey.
So you were into sports as a kid?
Yeah. Played all the way through high school, played a little bit of college football. So that was always, athletics was always part of my life. And going with athletics is always that challenge to be better than you are yesterday towards constant improvement.
Tell me a little bit about your relation to sports and how that kind of shaped you.
Yeah, I think it's part of the foundation I built for myself in terms of who I was, not just tied to the actual sports themselves, but building a work ethic and understanding that you're going to go through difficult things and you're not always going to win and you're always trying to improve yourself. when you're going through a difficult time, you're always going to default to who you are or who you built yourself into. So if you built yourself into someone who gives up easily when tough times happen, well, that's what's going to happen when you get into that crisis. If you've built yourself into a person that's going to say, this is going to be really tough, but that's okay, I'm going to take a step forward and figure this out, then that's what you default to when you're in your toughest time. Overcoming tough times prepares you for one thing in life, overcoming more tough times. If you're used to being uncomfortable, yeah, and I mean that in a good way, because you're challenging yourself, you're accustomed to that. So it's not new to you when some challenge comes up in your life. You'd say, I felt this before, and I know I've gotten through the tough time before, and I can do it again. That's okay. And I can get through this.
Having that kind of determination gave Jason a competitive edge, driving him to look for bigger challenges. He tried mountain climbing for a while, but he would finally be tested when he started participating in triathlons.
I was 26, so that was the second
26.
Ironman I had done. It was an Ironman triathlon, so 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and 26.2 mile marathon. So training 10 months for it, and previous to that as well. And the day is 102 degrees, and it's early June, and out in Colorado where I trained, it hadn't been hot yet. So your body's not accustomed to the heat yet. And it's supposed to only be 82 degrees this race. That's the average for that time of year in early June. And it turned out to be 102 degrees. So you're melting on the bike for the 112 mile bike. And I'm just getting sick. I'm throwing up. And eventually I get onto the run. So and I get out, so you transition and you go for your bike and you put on your run stuff, and I am completely out of it mentally. I have not enough calories. I'm just like, I have no idea how I'm going to finish this 26.2 mile run. And I start going out of the transition zone where you put your shoes on. And I'm so out of it, I don't know what direction to turn to start the course. And I'm trying to look for an arrow. Usually there's some arrow that tells you which direction to start the run course, because it's not obvious, because it kind of curls around. And I just start running in a direction, and I'm just like, I hope I didn't pick the wrong direction, because if I picked it, it'll be so debilitating that I'm not sure I'm going to finish. So I start, I realized about 2 miles into it, I'm actually going the right direction. My body's completely depleted, and I'm dry heaving on the side of the road. And I just said, don't worry about 26.2 miles. Just get to the first 6.2 miles, so a quarter of the way in. Just figure out how to get there. And I'm continuing throwing up. I'm bleeding. I can't take water down. I can't eat. And I kept on doing that. I got to 6.2 miles, and I said, okay, you got here. I still don't know if I can finish it, because I feel horrible. My body feels like it's shutting down. I was like, okay, let's just get to the next 6.2 miles. And I kept on doing that the entire race. Worst race I did time-wise. I just said, I'm not giving up today. Today is not the day to give up. I'm just keep pressing. And I got finished with that. And I don't know how I ended up where I was, but I was on my knees, and I was yelling for my girlfriend at the time. And she shows up out of nowhere. I felt blind. I couldn't see anything. And she gets me back to the hotel, and I slept for the next 48 hours. And I got up for maybe a minute here or there, and my body was just a mess. But I was just like, today's not the day to give up. I'm getting through this no matter what. And it wasn't the first time I went beyond, common sense would tell you, you should stop. You should not put your body through this. This may have permanent, implications to your health. And I was just like, yeah, my mind wasn't in that. Call it going into the void, where your mind just goes into the simplest sense of survival. And it just goes, just put one foot in front of the other, just keep going, and you're going to find a way to finish it if you keep going. And you're breaking up into these really small increments, because your brain would be overwhelmed by going, I can't get to that 26.2 miles, but I can get another step and another step and another step. And that was, that put me to the test for sure.
Now, I've actually done a marathon. I'm glad I did it, but I can tell you it's damn hard. Experts say if you're starting from scratch, it would be ideal to train 6 months ahead of a marathon to properly build up your stamina. I can't even begin to imagine what level of training you would have to do for these triathlons. So for Jason, going through that particularly challenging one would set the bar for him in terms of what he felt he could accomplish. But in between his weekend warrior hobbies, Jason did have a day job.
So I work in the financial industry, and working hard for years, I finally get a promotion. And you think you're making the right steps, and then you don't realize what this is actually going to turn into. Because I didn't know it was going to turn into 12 to 14 hours a day, and kind of the stress that put me under that. It really tested me, because there were nights I would wake up almost every night at like 3 a.m. after a couple hours of sleep, just stare at the ceiling and go, I'm not sure how I'm going to get through all the tasks I have tomorrow. And I felt a great responsibility, because if I said I took this job, someone entrusted me to give me this job, and I better own up to it and do the best job I can and honor that person for making that decision and taking the risk on me to give me that job. So I think I'm very good at, I always say the worst part about my personality and the best part of my personality or trait is the same thing. And that's like, I can put my head down and get anything done. And I'm just like, I can plow through this and I can get it done. Project after project after project, deadline after deadline after deadline. It was just a constant nonstop. And I wasn't taking vacation days. I wasn't, you wake up, you're directly to the office. By the time you get home and you eat food, and you're just like maybe an hour to try to unwind before it's time to go to sleep and do the same thing over and over again. And a lot of times it went into 6 days a week, sometimes even went into 7 days a week. And it just never, it was just like, it almost felt like was handcuffed to a treadmill, where if you stop, you're going to get dragged by your arm, and you're just like trying to keep up, and it's a full sprint all the time. And it was almost like I was scared to stop, because I didn't know if I took a day off or time off that I was going to be able to go at that pace again. Yeah, I kept on pushing through. I kept on putting one foot in the other. But as far as personally, it destroyed me, because I wasn't spending time with friends and family. And, I had all these volunteer things I wanted to do, and I got to none of it because I was working 12 to 14 hours a day. I was accomplishing something every single day, but I was putting the rest of my life on the sidelines, and I was incredibly unhappy and stressed out. And I probably wasn't very happy to be around, because I didn't even like being around myself, because I just turned into push ahead, get this done. And it destroyed me for a while. And it took something amazing to happen in my life to kind of dig me out of that, and let me look at life in a different way, in a better perspective, that wouldn't have happened unless I went through this amazing journey.
I can so relate to that. So at what point did you encounter skydiving as a hobby?
Years before I actually started as a hobby, I went once, because I was wondering what it would be like, and so one day I just decided to sign up. It actually happened 2 weeks before that triathlon I described in the 102-degree heat. I was having doubts. Man, I just need something to get out of the office today, and at a spur of the moment, I signed up for the skydive. It was a tandem with an instructor attached to you, so you don't have a ton of responsibility other than just have fun and hang out and see what it's like. And then it was about 10 years later, I was so burnt out. And before that, I was doing those triathlons and endurance activities. And with the new job, I just didn't have enough time to do it. I kept on failing, so I was just so exhausted with the job. And I needed some sort of escape from the everyday stress. And I passed the airport where the skydiving happened hundreds of times on my bike when I was racing triathlons. And I saw it one day. I was like, man, I need something that I can do that could take my mind away from work, but I don't have to put in all this training with running and biking and swimming and all this. So I was like, maybe I should go skydiving. And I remembered back to 10 years earlier, and I decided, I was like, all right, well, how do you even, I started researching and figure out how do you even get a skydiving license. And a couple months later, I just signed up and decided to join the course and figure out how to get a skydiving license. So it was really an escape. But it also, I just needed a hobby to take my mind off of kind of the everyday, because the stress was just eating me alive. And I was like, I need to change something in my life.
I think it's fascinating because that's like, there's a lot of hobbies that I would probably consider before skydiving. And I just think it's wild that you went right to skydiving. Was there fear?
Oh, tremendous.
Yeah.
So the odd part is I was looking for something to take my mind away from work. But at first, when you're learning, my palms would start sweating on Thursday if I was jumping on a Saturday and learning on Saturday. I would get so nervous. I was terrified at first. But that's part of the challenge, is to overcome that fear. Because, fear can either protect you or keep you away from doing something that you're capable of, but fear overcomes you and you don't try to overcome the fear. So it was a challenge, because I think there's a big difference between saying you could do something and actually going out and doing it. And looking at that, I questioned myself. I was like, well, can I get up in that plane? Can I do all the things I need to do to safely get to the ground, deploy the parachute, fly the parachute? There's all these challenges involved, and it made me nervous. And sometimes that feeling in my stomach that made me nervous was the impetus or the reason I started a lot of things, like climbing mountains, triathlon. I wasn't sure I could do it, and I wanted to figure out if I could or not.
Fascinating. So when you first went, walk me through how it works, because I've never been skydiving.
So you take about a 4-hour course where they teach you all the basics. And then your first few jumps, you have 2 instructors. So you're jumping by yourself. You're not attached to anyone. And they grab your leg loop and they jump out. And their job is really to make sure your parachute deploys in case you get so overwhelmed and it's your first few times. So they don't know how you're going to react if you jump out before you're supposed to jump out, or whatever the case would be. They're really good flyers, so they're probably going to catch up to you, but there's a possibility they won't. So they kind of jump out with you, hold your leg loop, and you're doing all these things to prove what you need to do in the air to deploy your parachute. So you're practicing touching the place where you pull the parachute out, or your pilot chute out to deploy the parachute, and you're doing that as practice the first few seconds. And then eventually it's time to actually pull the parachute, and they make sure and then they lose you because they can't hang on to you anymore, because your parachute deploys. And then they're on walkie-talkies with you to make sure you're flying in the right direction towards the landing zone, and kind of giving you instructions. Sometimes you can hear them, sometimes you can't. And so that's over. There's 7 basic levels that you're trying to overcome. And after about 4, then it goes to 1 instructor that's flying with you. And then eventually, after they sign off and say, we think you're safe enough, after the 7 jumps or the 7 levels, then you start jumping with a coach for another 12 or so jumps. And then you get your license, I think, at 25 jumps. And then you're able to jump on your own.
So how often were you jumping?
Once I got the license, pretty much every weekend. It was rare not to jump. So yeah, it definitely becomes, you're not just jumping once and going home. After you once you get used to it, because at first it's really overwhelming. Your adrenaline is spiked every single time, and you're sometimes you're shaking. But after a while, it becomes your normal, and you actually, when you're jumping out of the plane, you become more relaxed, and your heart rate goes down. Now that doesn't happen at first. It takes a while, over 100 jumps for me, to start feeling like that. And then you start not being overwhelmed, and you start being more present and enjoying it a whole lot more, with what you're used to. And you're practicing skills at the same time. You're flying with other people. So yeah, as you get going, it's 3-4 jumps a day, sometimes more than that in one day. So you're spending most of your day there with other people flying.
For somebody who's never done skydiving, what does it actually feel like? I've always wondered this. What does it feel like when you're standing at that door? What does it feel like when you take that first step out of the plane?
My favorite part of skydiving is when you first jump out of the plane, because it is the most freeing feeling that you can have, in my opinion. It's just like, it's just like all the weight off your shoulders. You're out. There's no going back in. Plane just flew past you. And so it's a really freeing feeling. I love that. Especially the first 10 seconds is my favorite. You're accelerating for the first 10 seconds, and then it almost feels like you're floating on air. you don't have a sense really of falling, except when you look down and the earth becomes bigger and bigger and bigger as you go through those thousands of feet. So that's your only sense of fall. But otherwise, you just feel like you're floating in the air. And then eventually, you're doing all your safety checks and making sure you're pulling your parachute at the right time. Eventually when the parachute opens, it's kind of a little bit of a jerk, sometimes harder than others. And then that parachute's over your head, and it's kind of a sense of relief when it looks good, because you look up at it and you make sure it's big and square and it's fully deployed. And you're kind of like, all right, we're through this, and let's go through our other safety checks. So you're always monitoring yourself as you're going through the jump. But jumping out of the plane at first, it's just the sense of just, wow, freedom.
It's incredible.
Then came that fateful day.
So first 2 jumps went great that day, no problems, no malfunctions, nothing. And so third jump of the day comes on. I get out of the plane, deploy the parachute. Parachute's over my head. It's nice and square. Everything looks great. Still, just like an ordinary jump, nothing out of just routine, I would call it. And so I'm coming in for a landing, and I'm about 150 feet off the ground. And a huge gust of wind comes off the mountains and kind of picks me up and throws me. And I had never been thrown that hard before. I've definitely get hit by unexpected wind from behind, but certainly not with that force. So about 150 feet off the ground, I'm getting ready to land on a grass field. Same one I've landed on hundreds of times before. Like I said, routine. And so I get hit by that wind, and I'm shaken up, and I'm kind of, I'm shaken up, and I'm kind of just looking around and trying to figure out what just happened. And you're kind of like, oh, that was the wind, and I speed up. So, in quite a bit from being hit by that wind. So I'm trying to get a sense of exactly where I am on that field. And as I look out, so 150 feet is about 5 seconds before you land, and you're not coming straight down. You're going at a forward speed. And in front of me is the field, but then there's like a cattle fence. It's like a wire fence with 3 strands, and then behind that are a row of airplane hangars. So it's pretty wide, right to left. And they're big metal buildings, like 20 feet high, I guess, 25 feet high or so. I'm not sure if I'm going to land before that fence or not, with that increased speed from the wind. So I know I have about 5 seconds to go. Now, the first thing in my mind is, okay, don't turn. And the reason I say don't turn is, so the way a parachute turns is you have 2 handles, and if you pull the right handle, your parachute dives towards the ground and creates a turn because the outside of your parachute collapses a little bit. So if you're 1,000 feet off the ground and you do a turn and lose 200 feet, well, that's no big deal because you're still 800 feet off the ground. If you do that at 150 feet and you dive 200 feet, not only are you increasing your speed greatly because you're diving towards the ground with gravity, but you're not going to stop and have your parachute recover or fly straight again in that distance, and you're going to hit the ground at an increased level of speed, and obviously the ground's not going to move. So that's one of the number one reasons skydivers die, is they call it low turns. They turn low under their parachute. So the first thing it goes, do not do that. That will lead to probable death. It's like, okay, don't do that. And I was like, okay, we have 5 seconds before you're going to land. So you just have to shake it out and relax, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen because I can't turn. I just have to wait this out. So as I'm descending, you don't know, so you're kind of calculating in your head every second, like, do I think I'm going to land before, or do I don't think I have enough room? And with about 1 second left, I'm getting close to touching down, but I'm carrying way too much speed. And I was like, there's no way I'm stopping before this cattle fence. So I hit that, and right before that, in my mind, I go, life's about to change. I'm not sure how. And I would say later, thank God it did. So I hit this fence, and the strand comes directly tight on my chest and my abdomen, like right away. And it breaks. So it didn't slow me down at all. I just feel it just pound right through it. And then 10 feet behind is that airplane hangar, and I hit that going probably about 30 miles an hour, and I black out.
There's no question that skydiving is considered a high-risk sport, but let's put this into context. According to the most recent studies, 3.2 million skydives occur every year. After the two most recent World Freefall Skydiving Conventions, data gathered from 8,976 skydivers for a total of 117,000 jumps showed that only 2.3% involved a mishap, and more than half resulted in only minor injuries. Still, research from skydiving associations all over the world do show that parachute failure isn't really the problem, and that injuries occur due to incorrect procedures and midair collisions. But the leading cause remains at the point of landing, which is exactly what happened to Jason.
So when I hit on my left side, and I hit so hard, 10 of my 12 ribs break on the left side, and they impact my heart with such force that my heart breaks out. So your heart sits in something called a pericardial sac. It breaks out of the sac, ends up on the right side of my chest, and is all twisted up. Besides the heart, there were 3 other organs damaged and 20 broken bones. So I didn't find out that until much later, because I blacked out because my body shut down on impact. So I asked 2 different independent people at 2 different times to see if they just made that up and they were pulling my leg, or I really said that. But so I was laying on the ground, body parts were bent in directions they shouldn't be bent in. And luckily the safety crew was, about 50 yards away. So they saw me hit the building. They're on there in seconds, and they start trying to talk to me to figure out, what my condition was. And so the first thing I said was, and I was blacked out, so I had no idea that I said any of this, was, don't call anyone. I'll be okay. Just give me a minute. And what I think that really was just the fight or flight response to something's terribly wrong. It's almost like when you fall down on ice or something like that. And you're like, if I get up right away, everything's okay because my legs work and my back is working. And so I think it was almost like that kind of reaction. If I say I'm okay, or if I get up, which there's no way I was getting up with all the injuries I had, that things were going to be okay. And I think that was my mindset. And I think that was the mindset, or the default from the foundation, going, I've been through hard things. I'll go through it again. I've never quit in the mountains. I've never quit in triathlon. I'm not starting to quit now. But I didn't consciously think that. I was out, but that's my body just instantly took over and started fighting.
Unknown to Jason, though, the real fight was still ahead. And it was going to be a long and torturous one. And consider this your official trigger warning. Graphic descriptions ahead of what Jason went through.
They called 911. Luckily, the fire chief was luckily like a mile away at the time. So he's on the scene within a couple of minutes. And so they brought me to an initial hospital about 2 miles away just for a self-assessment. And they called in the Flight for Life helicopter right away because they knew it was a small community hospital. I guess they didn't have the facilities or the technology or everything to do the surgery they needed to do. So yeah, they Flight for Life me 50 miles away to a level 1 trauma center that takes care of the worst kind of accident victims. They have 2 helicopters on standby at all times because I've been there since then, and so they take horrible trauma victims to that hospital. And the doctor who did my heart surgery later tells my family that no doctor in that hospital had ever performed a surgery, that heart surgery they performed on me before, because no one ever makes it alive. They said, when your heart moves from one side of your chest to the other, it's instant death. Things rip apart. It's like, they're like, you're dead on the field. We can't figure out how you made it off the field, how you made it to the helicopter ride, or how you made it through the surgery. And the doctor said, I knew how to do it because of my textbooks in medical school, but this is the first time I had done it. So they couldn't figure out how I lived to make it to the hospital for the surgery. When the doctor tells you there's no way you should be alive, and what happened to you, it kind of sinks into as like, well, this is beyond, an amazing miracle. So they would ask them like, well, what does he do, and what does we can't figure out how he's alive, and tell us more about him and what he does in his hobby times and with triathlons and climbing mountains and things like that, to try to piece together how my bones didn't just go through my heart and kill me that way. And they had a hard time trying to figure that out. But yeah, so for 3 days they don't close up my chest because they saw it through my sternum. And then besides that, lungs were collapsed, spleen was lacerated, colon had to be put back into place, diaphragm was ruptured. So for the first 3 days, they didn't know the heart worked, so they wanted to test it before they closed me up, because if they need to get back in there right away, they didn't want to unwire my sternum and all that. So after 3 days, they decided, okay, the heart works, he's going to live. And then they started working on the rest of my body, which was 20 broken bones. So they induced me into a coma during that time.
How did they leave your chest cavity open? That seems insane.
Yeah, so it's wired closed when they put your sternum back together. As one of my friends described, who was my first person on the scene at the hospital. My parents and family are on the East Coast, so they had to fly in. And the way she described it was, the nurse came in and was talking to her and said, basically, hospital-grade saran wrap was on my chest. And did she want to look at my internal organs, because you could look through and see them if you really wanted to? And my friend's like, no. She was so overwhelmed by, obviously the shocking news of, Jason's in a coma. And she was sitting there. It was enough for her to sit there. And she described, that's the way she described it to me later on, that it was, maybe they had something holding it together a little bit, but not fully, because they wanted to be able to rush in if they had to do some other heart surgery after that to save my life.
Wow. That's shocking. That's all I can say about that. So you had 20 broken bones. What was the tally? What else?
Yeah, 20 broken bones, 4 organs, concussion. Yeah, that's
pretty good. That's a good roster. That's not bad. I can't beat that. How long were you in the hospital?
3.5 months. For pretty much 10 weeks, I wasn't able to move because my pelvis was broken in my leg and in my upper body as well. But I couldn't put any weight on my legs because they were scared that I would re-break my pelvis, because it was broken in the front and the back, along with my femur. So the only thing really that I could move myself was my hand. And that had a broken wrist, but I was able to use my hand enough to feed myself. But everything else was kind of in cast and couldn't move. So it's things you take for granted in life, as far as self-care and being able to walk or taking care of yourself. You fully value, or when you're humbled. After first couple days I was laying there, I was in a mindset, and you're not fully clear at first. You're not, it's like you don't wake up in yourself already because of all the medication putting you in that coma. But at first they're like, you need to allow, the hospital folks was like, you need to allow us to help you. You can't do all this on yourself, or by yourself. And I finally was like, okay, I need help. Because I always prided myself in being very independent and taking care of my own issues and problems. But I needed other people to help me at that point. There was no other choice, and the people that took care of me were incredible. All throughout the process, whether I was in the hospital, when I was doing rehabilitation outside the hospital. But I had to let other people help me because I couldn't do anything for yourselves. And just, the littlest thing you take for granted is like you stop taking it for granted after you go through and laying in the hospital for that long, when you can't do anything by yourself. So yeah, it's a humbling experience to go through that.
So who was there with you in the hospital?
Yeah, so my parents, luckily they were retired, so they lived on the East Coast, and they flew out as soon as they got the call from the hospital that, I might not live. And they were able to stay with me for the entire time in the hospital. And I always said to my mom after it was over, I was like, one of the silver linings of this is that I got to spend, this entire time with you and Dad, every day. Now, it wasn't the most pleasant time. I mean, for them or me, but I was like, how many times it would have took me to fly back to the East Coast to visit you guys, to accumulate whatever it was, 105 days of spending time together. And so that was really one of the silvers. I was like, I got to spend 105 days with you guys in a row. And that would have never happened unless I got hurt. So that I always was looking for those kind of silver linings and amazing time. And my mom passed away about 2.5 years ago. I didn't know it was going to be closer to the end of her life. We got to spend a lot of time together. And that was amazing. When I first woke up from that coma, the first thing he said, you're really dehydrated. You need something to drink. And my dad picked up this cup and it had a straw and he put it in my mouth. And I drank it. And I said, what is that? That is the best thing I have ever tasted in my entire life. And yeah, I actually got him to laugh when I said that. I said, what is that? He said, that's water. And so it's your body's so deprived that it makes things taste so much better than plain water would ever taste. I was just like, that's water. I was like, but the funny thing is, so that also goes back to something when I'm laying there in my body and I'm kind of in shock. Drinking that water brought me back to another experience in my life, which made me have comfort. When I first moved out to Colorado, I was by myself. It was the first big mountain I was taking on by myself. It's near winter, and it was much bigger and took much longer than I thought it was. And it turned out that I summited the mountain. On the way down, it was below zero, no sleeping bag, no tent, no nothing, because I thought I was going to be able to go much faster, and you don't want to put extra weight on you. So I wound up staying the night nowhere near the bottom, and I basically just hid behind a rock and would have to move my hands and my feet every few seconds, or they would go numb. And you're laying behind that rock and going, I'm not sure I could survive or not. I've read about people that have survived this or not, so why can't I? So I kept on going throughout the night, and it was after Thanksgiving, so there was 12 hours of darkness. It was freezing. So I get out of that situation, get down, and when I got down, I was, had food in like 20 some hours. And the first thing I was just like, whatever's opening, I'm getting. And it happened to be McDonald's. And McDonald's tasted like the best meal I had ever eaten. So when I'm laying there going back to the hospital, and I taste that water, it brings me back to surviving on the mountain that one time. And when I'm surviving on the mountain, I go, oh, this feels familiar. I've gotten through that crazy situation, and this must be the taste of deprivation. And I go, okay, this is foreign to me that I'm going through this, but it's familiar, and I think I can get through this.
So this is what gratitude is. It is the awareness of the good, rather than just seeing the bad. It's the recognition of, oh my God, I'm so grateful for this part, for that little droplet of water, right? Like, it sometimes takes going through the fire to be able to see life like that.
So I love the outdoors. The colors are brighter now, and the sun, the sunrise, the rising of the moon, and you just appreciate it so much more. Where maybe before I would walk at a faster pace or not notice it as much. Now there I'll stop and look around and go, this is amazing, and appreciate it. Before, if I was stressed, I'd go for a run and you get an endorphin high, or jump out of a plane a couple times, and not you could escape things, and all those escape mechanisms were taken away. And I had to lay there and say, okay, you weren't happy before this accident. You got saved for some sort of reason. And what are you going to do with this? And how are you going to become better from this experience? And it was the best thing I ever went through, but it was the most difficult thing I ever went through, laying in that bed, because it's just 24 hours of beating yourself up and going like, exploring every relationship you had ever been in, every whether it's family or romantic relationship or whatever it is, and going like, how could I have been better? Where did I fall short? And I'm the kind of person that concentrates on where you fall short. I wasn't patting myself on the back for anything. I was like, you fell short here. You could have been better here. You could have been more present in your life when you were with people. Because during that, especially during that, really stressful time, I look back and you go, I wasn't really present when I was with people because I was always thinking of something else that I'm stressed about, and you're not honoring the people you're with. You're just you weren't even spending time with the people in the way you should have been. And you start playing that record over and over and over again, and start beating myself up until I hit a bottom. Because I knew you had to hit a bottom before I was going to build myself up again and become better than I was before. So there, and also during that time, there was a tremendous amount of guilt I was going through because, I'm like, I can't believe I put my family through this. Ultimately, you could say, well, it was the wind, but I'm the one who decided to jump out of that airplane all those hundreds of times, and I got hurt. And I can't imagine what it must have been like for my parents to hear, your you know your son might not live and you need to fly out to Denver right away, or when they walked in and saw me in the coma for the first time and I'm just broken and there's a breathing tube down my throat. I can't even really imagine. But I did that to him. It's my fault. And they're sitting next to me and, not leaving my side, but at the same time, you're just like, sometimes I can't look at them because they never blamed me for any of that. There was never a blame. They just were happy you're alive and we're gonna help you get through this. So I was incredibly lucky how amazing they were to me, but it wasn't a surprise that they acted like that. But
Of course, I'm sure your family is incredible. So at what point did you decide you needed something to shoot for?
within a week of waking up from the coma, um, I knew how my brain worked, and my brain works as like goal oriented. You need to shoot for something, because just to like rehabilitate my body for the sake of rehabilitating my body. Would I do it anyway? Of course, because I want my body to work again. But my mind works better when it says, okay, here's an ultimate goal, rehabilitation, even outside the hospital. But there's no real way to quantify that. How are you feeling? It's like, well, maybe you're grumpy in the morning, you say you don't feel well, and at 3 o'clock you feel better. But I wanted a measurable way to do it because that's how my mind works. So about a week after waking up from the coma, I'm laying alone at night in the dark, and I go, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to race in a triathlon again. And initially I said, well, I think that's going to take 2 years. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to keep it to myself until it's time to tell somebody else that I'm going to do it. So, yeah, I said, I'm going to do that. Now that was so far off, and what I was going through at that time was so big and overwhelming. But I was like, eventually I'll get there. But this is the standard. If I could do a triathlon, that means my upper body works, my lower body works, my heart works, lungs, everything has to work because you have to use every part of your body to do it. So that was my rationale with the triathlon. My doctors initially, I never told them I was going to do triathlon, but when I got cleared for the first time to be able to put weight on my legs, so this is about the 3-month mark, and because they predicted I was going home in a wheelchair, because I told them 3 days into the fourth hospital I was in, the rehab hospital, they never tell me what my goal is. So 3 days after getting there, I said, well, you never told me what my goal is before I get out of the hospital. And they look at me kind of puzzled, and I said, I'm walking out of here on the last day. And they're just like, yeah, we're preparing you to go home in a wheelchair. And I saw these looks on like, you are out of your mind if you think you're walking out here. They didn't have to say it. I saw it on their face. Now, looking back, I could see why they thought I was a lunatic, because the first day I'm in this rehab hospital, they're transferring me from my bed to my wheelchair. And they asked me to sit up. And I couldn't sit up. I wasn't strong enough. And then they asked me to roll to my side. And I'm not strong enough to roll to my side. So they really had to drag me into the wheelchair. And then they asked me to push the wheelchair. And at this point, the cast had been off my arms for 3 or 4 days. So they were super weak. And this is about, 2.5 months after the accident. So I couldn't move for 2.5 months. So you lose all your muscle. Everything's gone. It's just skin hanging off bone. So they say, push the wheelchair to breakfast. Let's just see what you can do. and the room's about 20 feet wide, and I only can make it about 10 feet across the room, pushing myself because my arms are so weak. And they take the wheelchair from behind. I never quit, but they said, if we let you keep pushing at this rate, you'll never get to breakfast because breakfast only lasts an hour and you're never going to get there. So they keep pushing me. And so they knew I was going to try to walk out of there. Now, I think they totally forgot that because they thought it was such a crazy idea that I was going to walk out of there. But about 5 weeks or so later, I go for an x-ray on my legs. So you only can do x-rays every 4 weeks. And at this point, the hospitals or the medical insurance is only going to pay for me to stay for so long. And if I didn't get good results on the x-rays and try to be able to put some weight on my legs, I was going to go home in a wheelchair. So I get the x-rays and the doctor's like, well, you're not fully healed, but you're healed enough. We'll let you put some weight on your legs because it'll help you to heal those bones. So I go back to the hospital and they say, are you ready? Do you think you want to walk today? I was like, I'm ready to walk right now. I don't want to wait till the rest of the day. So they bring me by myself in this big empty room for the rehabilitation at lunch. And they say, all right, now it's time. And I shimmy to the end and I put my feet on the ground and I'm like pushing as hard as I possibly can. And my legs are shaking out of control after 3 months of not being able to put any weight on my legs and my pelvis being broken in my femur. And I'm able to push myself up and then I'm able to walk. It's about 8 feet long. There's parallel bars here between to try to steady yourself if you need them. And I walk to the end of the 8 feet. And they have me do it twice and they start bringing me back to the room because they're like, we only could let you do so much in one day because you haven't walked in 3 months. So the person that's pushing me back in my wheelchair to my room, she's like, Jason, I thought you were going to be celebrating walking for the first time. She's like, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never seen anybody with as many injuries as you had, bedridden as long as you have, just get up and walk like you did. But I was less impressed with myself. I was like, I didn't walk really well. And I said to her, I was like, but remember, the goal is not to walk a few steps. The goal is to walk out of this hospital on the last day. A week went by. I walked all the way out of the hospital and all the way back to my car with the assistance of crutches, but I did it on my own without help. When I went to that doctor and they gave me clearance for the first time, my first question to them after they said, you'll be able to try to walk today, was how many more months before I can run? And the doctor choked on his coffee and was like, run? He's like, I'm the guy who did surgery on you. He goes, I don't think you really understand the extent of your injuries. You're probably never going to run again. It'll be too painful. So that was leading. He didn't know I had the goal to do the triathlon. But so I looked at him and I was like, I kept it to myself. I said, okay, we'll see. And then 3 months later, I got more x-rays. And at this point, I'm out of the hospital. So this is about 6 months after the accident or so. And it's a different doctor giving me x-rays to check if my legs are fully healed. At that point, he said they're fully healed. And I said, well, what do you think about me walking or running when I get home? And he said, what do you mean running? Because he saw me walk into his office and I'm huge limp. I had more surgeries on my elbow. So my left arm is like 3 times the size of the other arm. I look terrible. And he's like, what do you mean run? I was like, well, you said my legs are healed. Does that mean I can go and run? And I didn't tell him what the other doctor said 3 months earlier. I conveniently left that out. And he goes, I was like, well, can I break myself further if I try to run? And he goes, no, I'm not sure it's a great idea to try to run, but I said, but it's not a no. He said, no, it's not a no. So I said, so I got home that day and I put running shoes on, and it wasn't quite a run, but it was better than a walk. It's more like a waddle is what I call it. But I made it 50 feet. And then I go the next day, I'm going 100 feet. And then about a month after that, I had been running for about a month, and I'm talking to my mom, and no one ever let me in on how long recovery should take. And to be honest, I was scared to talk about, to be like, what is possible to recover from? Because you never want to hear, like, that's not going to be possible. And she finally tells me that day, because I tell her, Mom, I ran for the first time, because she's always so scared. when I would do something new in rehab, she thought I was going to hurt myself. I said, Mom, don't worry, I've been running for a month, so I haven't hurt myself yet. And she said, well, you know why I'm so concerned about you? She said, they told a week after you woke up from the coma, they took your dad and I aside and said that Jason's not going to walk for at least, 6 months, maybe more. I walked in 3. And they said, he's not going to do anything useful outside of the house or go back to work for at least a year, maybe longer. I started doing things useful outside of the house as soon as I got home from the hospital 3.5 months later. And, so on that day I said, I thought about the race, because the race at first was like 2 years away. And then I'm like, wait a minute. If I'm doing everything twice as fast as anyone possibly predicted, and they said I would never run, I'm already running a little bit. I was like, I'm signing up for a race this year. I'm not waiting 2 years. I'm going to do it this year. So I went home, remembered a race I had done probably 6 or 7 years prior, because I hadn't been racing in the last 6 or 7 years prior to the accident. And I signed up for the race, and there was 3 months to train. I had no idea if it was possible or not, but I was like, there's only one way to find out. This particular race was a 0.9 mile swim, 30 miles on the bike, and 6.2 mile run. So, it's like medium distance, I guess.
That's a very far distance for most people. Certainly people with 20 broken bones, that seems completely impossible. So, let me try to I'm trying to think about what these conversations. Well, I guess, did you let doctors in on the fact that once you went home, were you still having conversations with doctors, and were you keeping this a secret?
Well, it started off slow because there was certainly doubt, but that's what fueled me. Like that feeling in your stomach, do I think I can do this? I don't know. And I was just like, okay, you've started from nothing and built up a little bit. How do we get to that day? So I'm breaking down every single day of what I need to do in order to get to that day. I'm mapped out day by day of what I'm doing for 3 months. And so I justify it in my mind going, if I could follow this plan, who knows if I could follow that plan physically, because I didn't know what I could do or what I couldn't do physically. I was like, but if I meet these little markers along the way, I think I could finish this race. I didn't want anyone to know I'm injured at the race. The time limit's the time limit. It didn't matter if I'm healthy or unhealthy. They give you a time limit. If you don't finish in this time limit, they're kicking you off the course. I knew it. So when I'm looking at it, I'm going, okay, I need to go this many miles an hour on the bike to make that cutoff. I need to go this fast on the swim. I need to go this fast on the run. And it's a cumulative effect also, right? Because it's like you could independently do those things maybe in that amount of time, but you have to do all 3 in that amount of time. So I'm breaking it down in my mind and going, okay, I found the plan that's going to get me to that day and is going to allow me to do it. Now, before I decided to do the race, it was the first, so I had elbow surgery where they had to re-break my elbow because it was stuck in place. So I have no movement in my elbow. They have to break it again, so I'm going to have movement in my elbow. So just a week before I decide to race is the first time they're allowing me to get my arm wet since the surgery. So I have no idea if my elbow could hold up to swimming or not.
My God.
And I hadn't ridden my bike yet either. So you look at these, you're like, these are some crazy decisions. But to me, I justified and said, I can do this. I didn't ask for permission to doctors to go, is this a good idea? I don't want to hear your ideas. I already heard you can't run, right? I already heard this is a bad idea to run. I'm like, yeah, you told me I wouldn't be able to ever do this again. If I listened to you, I'd be right, not be able to do this again. I'm not listening to trying to hold me back. Don't get me wrong. They're amazing doctors. They did amazing surgery, but they didn't know the mindset of the patient. They didn't spend enough time with me. Now, my therapist, my physical therapist, she did my elbow and my upper body. So she knew me really well because we spent 8 months together in the outpatient. And so she knew I was going to race. Eventually, I told her, and she's like, okay. She didn't ever say, don't do it. She just said, you're going to do this. So I brought my bike in one day. She goes, let's fit you on the bike. Let's see how you're looking on the bike. And so she was the whole way. She was like, okay. She never said, don't do it. And so she was a huge point of encouragement. I mean, she was amazing. At first was all about me, right? Can my body work again? But it became way more about other people See, it wasn't about me anymore. It was about all the people that helped me. And I want to show them all the work they put into me and all the care they put into me, what the result of that is. And it wouldn't have been possible without all their help. Because when I went in and visited all those people afterwards, because I made it a point as part of the journey is to go back to the ICU, go back to my therapist, go back to my doctors, and say, I wouldn't be here today unless you were willing to put all this effort into me. Because when you're in the hospital, and the one thing I found out, and people would always ask me about my accident when I was still in the hospital, and I realized the power of the story, because I would get finished with telling them what I was going through and the doubts I had, and then they would start talking about difficulties they were going through in their own lives, children, tough times with children, with spouses, and things they would see in the hospital every day, because not everybody makes it out of the hospital alive. And they're putting all this effort into it, and you could see the burden on their shoulders going, this is really hard. And they would share that with me. And I was just like, they would have never shared that with me unless I shared my story when they asked me about it. And it was part of my responsibility to go back to those people and say, keep going with what you do, because look what's possible, because I wouldn't be here unless you put all that effort into me. And the how thankful I was to all the efforts they gave to me. There was therapists. I heard all these stories. One of the therapists, when I was in the hospital, they go, I didn't really know how to treat you because you had so many injuries. I went home and had to look at my physical therapy book from school to try to put things together. And I'm thinking to myself, you worked 12-hour shifts at this hospital, and you went home and cracked your book so you could help me. And I was so overwhelmed by, I knew amazing people worked in hospitals, but until you're in there yourself, you kind of don't understand the gift given to me by all of these people and how much they're rooting for you to get through this, and how excited they were when you would progress. And I want to pay them back in some way.
One of the ways Jason does that is sharing his traumatic experience and journey in his book, 8 Days Till Sunrise. It's a must-read reevaluation of life and finding strength when things are at their bleakest.
And the whole purpose of the book is really to help other people going through tough times, because there's things that in our life sometimes we're so overwhelmed by, and oftentimes we don't give ourselves the credit with the strength we have inside. It's a lot of times easier to point at someone else, say they have strength that I don't have. You look at someone else who's accomplished something, and you don't want to give yourself the credit to say, I can do something amazing. And going through this journey, you want to give something back to someone else, and you find a purpose. And really through the journey, I found purpose. It was sharing your story and listening to other people's story. And I learned that the story of what I went through is a gift, because I wouldn't be able to connect to people in the same way unless I was willing to put it out there. And people are so much more willing to share what they're going through when you're willing to be vulnerable with them. And so the whole book is just really about how I got through this and how I can help other people getting through that toughest time. At first I was like, people would say, you should write a book. I said, I have no interest in writing a book if it's about me, but if it's about helping other people. And what I found out on the journey, that's what it was going to be about, was the reason I said, okay, I will write a book about that. It was hard to write because I would get done every day of writing, and it took me a while to understand that I was exhausted and I was depressed when I'd finish it. And then after a couple of weeks, I go, yeah, that's because you're reliving the darkest, toughest time in your own life every single day by doing this. But I go, if I could help at least one person by doing this, it's all worth it. And that's really what the book's about. It's about the journey, and I would say it's not really about skydiving. It's really not about triathlon. It's all about everything else on the journey, and those are just signposts and pieces of things that woke me up with a skydive to think about life in a way I wasn't thinking about, and I was hiding away from the realities of my life and that I wasn't happy. And it became so much more than just racing a triathlon, because it became more than just about me. It became about all the people along the journey. So it was all about the struggle along the way, and kind of how I got through it, and what I did with I guess what you would call unfortunate, but I always say it's the best thing that ever happened in my life, and I don't know where I would be today unless I went through the crash. And so it was a complete gift to me. So that's really what the book's about. It's about something unexpected happened in your life, and like, how do you get back from that?
If there's one thing you could tell people that you've learned about gratitude, what might it be?
There are people that will come into your life that you didn't realize were going to be so important at your time. There are people that I was casual friends with, where when I needed something, without ever asking, they show up at the hospital and they come on bunches of times. What do you need? How can I help you? At the skydiving company, I had no idea they were doing this. Within 2 weeks, they have a fundraiser for me and raise all this money, and they show up with a check in my hospital room. People are amazing, and when they see they can make, I was like, when they see they can make your life better, like how many people just came out of nowhere. And somebody's like, oh man, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve all this amazing care from these people. I got hurt, and why do I deserve this? And for the rest of your life, you go, I need to find a way to repay this. And the best way I find to repay it is, like, I could say is thank you as much as I want to those people, and give them a hug and thank them for it. But it's really to take what they gave me and pass it on to somebody else and help someone else going through their toughest time. And that's, to me, the best way I could find to repay the amazing things that people did for me when I needed somebody. Yep, 8 days of coma is about the sky. And it was the last sunrise I saw was the day of the accident, when I was out running trails before I went to the airport. And the first sunrise I saw was when my eyes opened from the coma and the sun was coming through my window, because the coma was a super dark place the entire time. And darkness preys on your mind. Whether it's from Navy SEAL training. I've never been a Navy SEAL, but they say the hardest part of the day is right before sunrise, because you've been dark the longest. I can also say that from climbing mountains, when you start at midnight and you're in darkness for 5 or 6 hours. The greatest doubts you have is when it's dark. Can I do this? And then when the sun comes up, it rejuvenates you in an amazing way. But the whole time in that coma was dark, and it was horrible nightmares that were trying to get me to quit and give up and let go and not deal with the pain, and not try to get out through the other side. And that was the 8 days of the coma.
Well, Jason, we're so glad you did get to the other side, and I'm so grateful for you sharing your story with us today. And this was incredible. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for letting me share my message of hope. You have to go out and find your own limits, and listening to other people trying to create your limits is never going to allow you to do that unless you strike out on your own and test. And sometimes you're going to fail, but unless you're willing to fail, you're never going to succeed.
He was told he couldn't have survived that accident. He did. He was told he wouldn't be able to run again. He raced in another triathlon. Jason's story is about more than survival. Ultimately, it's about inspiration and gratitude. You can read all about it in his book, 8 Days Till Sunrise, available on Amazon or at your favorite booksellers. And of course, you can follow him on Instagram at JWD Boulder. That's all for today. Remember, if you like what you heard, if it impacted you in any way, and if you think it's a message other people in your life might like to hear, I'd be so grateful if you'd give me 5 stars, leave a quick little comment. Those things really help. And share this podcast with your friends, either on social media or just word of mouth. I'm on a mission for us all to help each other focus on expanding our attention towards what's good in the world, rather than focusing on what's bad, one person at a time. If we all did that, even to our own little sphere of influence, the world has the potential to be a much more radically awesome place. Stick with me, friends. I've got your back. We're in this together, and it's a great day to see the greatness in the day. See you next time. The Gratitudeology podcast is written, executive produced, and hosted by me, Jamie Hess. Sound design and studio production by Gotham Production Studios. Our theme song is Maze by Hills, sung by Nadia Ali. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Gratitudeology.
Set us down where we're safe. I'll be right